All right, welcome back to Adobe Lightroom, to Adobe Photoshop, and today we're going to take the exciting jump into the Develop module. So the Develop module is actually the exact same program as Adobe Camera Raw. So if you've ever used Adobe Camera Raw, the Lightroom Develop module is exactly the same. Now it looks a little bit different, just the design of it. So essentially it does everything that Adobe Camera Raw does. So today I'm going to give you the basic layout of the program, and we're going to hit on what we call the global adjustments. And these are your most basic and most common adjustments. And global meaning they affect whole image. After this video, we're going to take a look at what we call selective adjustments. Now, what happens in photography, most adjustments tend to be selective. And what you will see is I do some of those selective adjustments inside of Lightroom, and I do some of those inside of Photoshop. It depends on what they are, and there's a reason for it. And the great thing about these tutorials are I will explain to you why I do them. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic and take a look at the global adjustments inside of the Develop module. So last time we left off here at the Library module inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic. And so today we're going to go ahead and slip on over here to what we call the Develop module. The Develop module is where it allows you everything to your image. But one thing I did want to mention is over here we do have some quick develop settings. And I will do these a lot of when I'm trying to create a gallery client, because let's say in this case, very similar, we've got a lot of the very same images. So I'm going to click the first one, hold shift, and I'm going to click them all. So all images are selected. And a lot of times when you're taking photos, especially in the beginning as you're learning, your exposures might be a little hot or a little bit dark, and they could use some basic adjustments before you want to send them to your client. However, if you're sending all the images, you don't want to tone 500 or 600 images. That would be insane. But this allows us to do some basic adjustments here. So our first option is a saved preset. So we can come here and use one of the saved presets. I don't use that, but the most obvious thing here is what we call white balance. So if your color is off, meaning you shot it and you had the wrong color balance on your camera and it looked like this, well, you don't want to send a client or somebody with a whole bunch of blue images. Or if these are just for yourself, the color balance is off. So this will allow us to come in here and adjust that. So I'm going to go back up here. I'm going to go to auto, see if auto looks better. That's usually my go-to. I go to auto. Auto can tend to sometimes be a little bit on the warm side, but this looks pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to as shot to see what the difference is. And yeah, that definitely looks better. So if you notice when we go to auto, in the blue, in the white, it's a little bit blue. So this is trying to get us more of a neutral color balance. But since I shot this with a low Kelvin temperature when the sun was down, we have that warmer color like the golden hour. And we're losing that by adjusting that. So I'm going to go from auto to as shot, but I can adjust any of those. And then we have the ability to temperature and tint. So this is going to be cool to warm, and this is going to be magenta to green. And you'll see this when we're in the Develop module. And then it lets us make jump and exposure. So when you're in the Develop module, it's going to allow us to make more finite adjustments. This kind of skips ahead a lot, but we can come in here. So the cool thing is, and I will do this just so you can see this, I'm going to go back into this and I'm going to make it so it's tungsten, so it looks bad so you can see it. You can see right down here, it made the first one that color. But what we can do is we can sync the settings. So we can go sync settings, and it's going to give us all the settings. We'll hit synchronize, and boom, just like that, it's going to apply that adjustment to all the photos. So it allows us to batch process and then export and upload those to the client. And then once they pick what they want, or you pick what you want, you can refine those adjustments. So what I'm going to do here is what I'm going to use here is what's going to become one of your most popular quick keys to use, which is Command Z. And that's going to essentially undo what we've done. So we're going to go back to our original settings. This is where we're going to stay. I'm going to click out of here. We'll click this image here that I selected, and we're going to go on over to the Develop module. All right, so inside of the Develop module, right now we have all of our images as thumbnails down here. All right, this is because it's in Lightroom. Up here we have our single image. Right here we have reference view, and right here we have sort of a before and after view, which we're going to take a look at later. Up here, once again, we still have our histogram, and our histogram is just showing us where the data is. So if you see this big, huge spike in this area, that's your shadow. This side is your highlight. So if you look, we've got some highlights here and highlights here. So there's a little jump in the bright, bright, bright highlights, and in the dark, dark areas, because we've got this in a black dog, that's showing us where the image is. A lot of people think the histogram needs to be low, big, low. Well, that doesn't make sense because it depends on your image. You just don't want your histogram to be going off the page. But if you have a good exposure in general in photography, your histogram is going to be pretty accurate. And so a lot of people think Lightroom or Photoshop, when you shoot raw, you can fix mistakes. The best thing you could do in photography is have an accurate exposure. So I absolutely do not use automatic modes because they're incorrect. So this image would be way overexposed if I did an automatic exposure because it would read all the black and overexpose that image. Down here we have this little symbol, and this little symbol is to get this screen that is already up. So I'm going to click on that, and that goes to the crop tool. But if I click this, it's going to go back. So this is that. This is our crop tool. This is for cloning or like removing bad areas. So if I wanted to remove an eye or some dust on the image, we would use this. Right here is red eye reduction. This is what we're going to take a look at next, which is selective adjustment. And that's it for right now. So right here, you can see we have what's called basic. And if that's closed, you just have that little arrow and you would click on this. These are our most common basic adjustments. Now, these are all basic adjustments, but we're not going to take a look at these today. We're just going to take a look at this section inside of the program because this is the most common area that you're going to use. So if we drop down here, the first thing that we have is an auto. And so auto is going to auto tone. So if I click this, it's going to auto tone that image. And it actually didn't do too bad of a job. What you can see here is it knocked down my highlights a lot and it opened my shadows up right there, which is pretty good. Usually with an image, a lot of times it will overexpose or wash out your highlights, but this did a pretty good job with the black and the white. So actually I'm not too disappointed in what it did, but right now I'm going to hit Command Z to go back. The next one is black and white. So if we wanted to convert this to black and white, we could simply click this. And this is important to know. You cannot take a perfect color image and convert it to black and white. If you look at this, it's going to be muddy and dark. So when you tone black and white, the first thing you need to do is convert it to black and white. So you don't have color areas to bring out an image. So you need to do that in your toning. And essentially, you're going to brighten the darker and mid-tone areas more in a black and white image than you would in color. So make sure that you do switch. The last thing we have down here is HDR. We're not going to be taking a look at HDR today. We'll get to that later. Next we have is what we call the profile modes. And if you remember when we were doing the settings, I had these basic settings and I set it to Adobe instead of camera default. This is what's going to give us the look, okay? And I'm just going to call it the look. It's just making the image look a certain way. So what Adobe Color does, and if you look at this, it's Adobe Landscape, Portrait, Standard, Vivid Color, blah, 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 and so on. And they just give us some different feels, or essentially their picture settings to make the beginning look a certain way. Adobe Color is going to give you basically realistic color and contrast. Adobe Landscape is going to give us an increase in contrast and color. Portrait is going to give us lower contrast and less color saturation, as well as standard. And I actually can hardly tell the difference between standard and portrait. And Adobe Vivid is going to give us a lot of contrast and color inside of our image. I tend to only use color or landscape and standard. I don't use any of the others. I'm not a big fan on oversaturated colors, as you'll see. So we're going to go ahead and start right here. So that is our color profile that we have right there. Next, we have those white balances. So we just saw in the quick develop settings, we have all these different settings for white balance. Now, if you are shooting a JPEG, you're only going to have as shot, auto, and custom. If you're shooting raw, you're most likely going to have all these. And these are presets, usually in the Kelvin color temperature, to give you certain looks. So if you shot in fluorescent and you wanted it to be more accurate, you would go there. So these are all non-destructive. Everything that we do in the develop module is non-destructive, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. So we can go through here and try all these and try to get the color balance you like the best. In this case, I'm going to leave it as shot because I like that the most. So down here, we have what we have temp and tint. And you can see the colors. We've got blue and yellow, magenta and green. So if we go to the right, it's going to be more warm. Left, it's going to be cooler. Left, greener. Right, more magenta. So it's going to Command Z to get that back to where it was in the beginning. And that looks pretty good. Right here, we have this little eyedropper. And what this does is set white balance. And this is the problem. In an image like this, it's not going to work because we are not neutral. We are warm because of the color temperature of the light. So what you're supposed to do with this is go in here and pick what should be a neutral color, and you click it, and it will balance that accordingly. So you need to make sure you have a white, a black, or a gray with absolutely no color in it. And the chances of that in life are very slim. So if you can see, if we do the same thing, because we have that warmer color, and I do it maybe here, it's going to cool that image off a little bit because it's trying to give you a neutral color, not a warm color. You can try it, but in general, I don't find this to be useful at all. I use my eye just because I've been doing this for so long. Next, we have tone, and under tone, we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and black. All right. And this is your basic adjustments and what you will use most of the time, whether working globally or selective. So exposure is just your overall exposure. And remember, these are all global. So when I do this, it affects the whole image, not in one spot. So when I brighten this, it's making this too bright, this too bright, this too bright, and this is too bright. So you don't want to make a global adjustment and make the dog look better, but this area look worse. So when you're making a global adjustment, it's usually just a small adjustment. In this case, exposure is not helpful because where it helps one area, it doesn't help the other area. And this is why we have selective adjustments. So I know I need to brighten the dog or the black, so I can just go into that specific location in a selective adjustment and do the same thing. So we're going to dial this out. Actually, I'm going to leave that there. So to reset this right here, instead of dragging the slider, what I'm going to do is I can hold the Option key on a Mac and the Alt key on a PC. And when I press that down, notice it goes reset tone. So I can hit reset tone and it resets. I can also come over here to the word exposure and double left click and it resets just that one. So here it will reset everything. And in this case, if I just double left click exposure, it's going to reset it back to 0. Sometimes hard to reset these little sliders exactly back to 0. So the next image is going to be confusing to a lot of you. So contrast is increasing, making your blacks blacker and your whites whiter. And what that does to a grayscale is it crunches it. And in general, you do not want to increase the contrast when you first start toning. Because if I want to open these black areas and I take my contrast and I make them darker, I'm going to have to make a bigger adjustment to open these areas or make them brighter than I would with a lower contrast. So what happens in this case is I will tone what we call flat. I will actually flatten my image out a little bit. Yes, I know it doesn't have that pop yet, but when we get into Photoshop, the last thing I'll do is I can increase the black contrast and give the image that pop. But by toning a little bit flat, it makes me have smoother gradations through the tonal range. So I'll tend to actually lower this a little bit unless for some reason the image came out a little washed out. So contrast is going to make your blacks blacker and your whites whiter as you go to the right and increase it. It's going to do the opposite when you go to the left. Highlights affects generally the highlights. So if I want to darken my highlights down, I can do that. Now, I'm sliding this down a little bit. So what I want you to do is right here, when I'm hovering over this, I want you to look back up here. We're going to get the red, green, and blue values. So when I go over that white, it's telling me digitally what that number is. So if you have a monitor that's maybe not accurate, you can get a general idea of percentages of something. So this is about 10% gray, which is essentially too dark. I'm going to go ahead and make this really bright, and then I'm going to come over here and read this. Now you can see we're at like 99.9%. So we've basically lost all detail. You don't want to be at 100%. Essentially with a bright white, I want to be somewhere around 2 or 3%. So that was about 1.5. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Look, this number value is much easier to read inside of Photoshop, and I'll show you how to do that. But I am taking a look at areas. I'm also going here to the black, and we're at 2.52 and 1.9%. That's too dark. I want to open that area up. You don't want your blacks to be at 100% black, or they'll just not look good when printed or outputted. Usually around 97% is much better than 100%. We can adjust the highlights there. Shadows are the same way, so we can open up the shadows or darken the shadows if we want. We can make our whites darker or brighter, and our blacks. And usually I'm not adjusting this here in the beginning or inside of Lightroom. In this case, I don't want to do any of that, so I'm going to hold that little quick key of Option. Yes, my left hand lives on my keyboard, because you will find out in Adobe, it's basically a toggle switch holder where you hold some keys or a combination of keys to get the computer to do something else. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Reset Tone and set that back to the beginning. So these are what we call our global adjustments. Now, right up here, we have two little triangles. We have one there, and we have one there. And right now, they don't have any little white boxes surrounding them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to click on that one. And now what you see is, see how it has a little white box around it? So we have activated what we call clipping. And so what's that's going to do is, if I make the image too bright, it's going to start to show red. But look, right there, it's not showing red, so it doesn't think we've clipped it. Well, I can tell you that's way too bright. And if we make something too black, you can see it's going to add blue. And that's when it's like way too dark. Like if you look at this, this is unusable. And even when I go to where it fully disappeared, it's still way too dark. So this shows you when you've gone way too far, but not far enough. So in general, I don't like it because it just irritates me, and I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So one of the things that we learn in Lightroom is knowing how to adjust images is one aspect, but to accurately adjust them so they really look good takes a while, and it involves either exporting or printing them out so you can get a realistic view of what they see. This is why that Shutterbug Academy on Facebook is great, because you can post your images and I can give you instant feedback about what you've done right or what you've done wrong. What happens to most beginners is they tone way too contrasty and way too dark because they think it looks good, all right? What I'm trying to show you here is traditional toning. Yes, this is a subjective art, and maybe you want it to be contrasty, but in the beginning, you need to understand that. So I'm going to show you here what I see. So right here, we have black, black, super black, super black, super black, super black. And we call this blocking, meaning though it looks like a two-dimensional object, at this point, it doesn't have any tonal range. So if we just open our shadows up a little bit, we're going to get more tonal range in those blacker areas so they don't become so harsh. In photography, and this is one of the most important things you're going to learn in all these tutorials, white and black are your two most difficult things to deal with, because those are where your eye is going to go to. Your eye will first go to the brightest area of the image, white, and if you have too much black, it can make the image heavy and give too much dominance to the area. So we need to control or adjust that. So most students are too contrasty because they want that pop, but they don't see at this point that blocking where there's just this weird transition from detail to non-detail. That's something to take a look at when you're toning your first couple of images. What I can tell you today is to just go through and practice making those adjustments, getting used to making the sliders or adjusting the sliders. So our last category down here that we see is what's called presence, and we have texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. So texture adds kind of more like detail or sharpening to the image. Clarity increases the contrast a little bit, and it adds some sharpening. Dehaze, if you have a hazy image, it can make it more hazy, or it can remove some of that kind of washed out feeling. Vibrance adds like some sharpening and some color to specific areas, and saturation just increases the saturation of the colors. Okay, so I'll go through and do these. So we're going to do texture. Sometimes you can see that sharpness. This is something you never want to do because this is the last step in photography. And I know students and people, the first thing they do is they come here and they mess around with the clarity and the texture because they want that sharpness of that pop, especially if you shoot Canon. Their images, because of the anti-aliasing filter, are a little bit soft. So the problem with it is when you sharpen an image, it needs to be the last thing you do because the sharpening amount is very dependent on the size of your image. So we have dehaze. All right, you can see what haze would look like. We add it, vibrant, and saturation. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold that quick key and reset the present. The last thing I'm going to show you is up here we have a little eyeball, and if we hold that, that's what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like after we've made our adjustments. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and hold this and reset the tone as well because I don't actually like what I did to the image. So let's quickly take a look and review what we did here. So right up here we have our histogram, we have auto, black and white, HDR, our color profile, which just gives us a set look in the beginning to start from. We have our white balance, and I will tell you, you must white balance all images before you ever do anything else. So if there's only one thing you do, make sure you check the white balance because it makes a huge difference in photography. Because if you're trying to combine multiple photos together and you don't tone them in the beginning or get the color balance right, it's going to be difficult to deal with. Then we have our global tone and our presence. So I'm going to go ahead and just make some adjustments just so you can see this. Now, what happens inside of Lightroom Classic, and if you look around here, you're going to see there's no save. There's no save anywhere. I go up here, look, you'll notice there's save a quick collection, but there's no save anywhere. So why is there no save? Because we catalog, and we also have something in Lightroom called an LR data file, right? Also, it's very similar to the XMP. Actually, there are two things doing the same thing. So when we make an adjustment over here, you can see this says plus 85. This stores that automatically. So when I slide this, if I move this back and now it's at plus 60, it automatically saves that in the LR data file and your XMP file. So if you were to go look in those two files, it would say for exposure plus 60, and this one it would be minus 15, and right here it would be plus 30 for shadow. So it stores that information instantaneously as soon as you make it, right? So if I was to quit this program and open it back up, it would read either, in this case, the LR data file, or if you were in another program like Adobe Camera Raw, it would read the XMP file, and it would apply those. These are just previews of what they look like. It does not physically change your image. Let me stress that again. It does not physically change your image. Your raw image is always a raw image and you cannot overwrite it, all right? The last thing we would do if we outputted this to Photoshop is it would create essentially a duplicate when we save it back, but it's not physically changing this image. Everything that we see on a raw file is just a preview of adjustments that you've made over here. Well, I hope you learned a little bit about global adjustments inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those down below. And don't forget, we do have a book called Shutterbug Academy. And the great thing about that is when you're learning to tone, what you think looks good usually isn't looking good. So it allows you to post images and gives me a chance to kind of take a look you've done, and I can give you direct feedback on those images. If you like this video, you can give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Hey, if you're looking for something new to wear, I have a company called T-Lab Designs where I design custom t-shirts and apparel. We make stuff for adults and children.